Hello everyone, welcome to the fourth edition of Climate Resilient Agriculture Virtual Club, 𝗘𝗀𝗿 East Africa chapter. My name is Anup Singh and I lead MicroSave Consulting business in Anglophone Africa, based in Nairobi, Kenya. I will be the facilitator and moderator for this session today. I'll quickly talk about MicroSave Consulting. MicroSave Consulting is a boutique consulting firm that has for over 20 years pushed the world towards meaningful financial, social, and economic inclusion. With 11 offices around the globe, over 250 staff members of different nationalities and varied expertise, we are working in over 50 developing countries. We partner with participants in the financial services and social and economic services ecosystems to achieve sustainable performance improvements and unlock enduring value. Moving on to, Doreen, can we move on to the slides, please? Next one, please. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the 𝗘𝗀𝗿 or the Climate Resilient Agriculture Virtual Club as well. Climate adaptation is finally getting the recognition and impetus it deserves. So we at MSC, we believe that digital technologies could be crucial in transforming agri-food systems to enhance farmers' adaptation and resilience. MSC is managing this Climate Resilient Agricultural Virtual Club to accelerate the adoption of agtech and fintech to support climate adaptation among smallholder farmers. The 𝗘𝗀𝗿, the Climate Resilient Agriculture Virtual Club, it brings together 4 critical players in agri-food systems. We are working with the digital technology providers. We are working with incubators, investors, and donors. We are also working with financial service providers and mass outreach and agriculture extension providers. We believe that the more partnerships that we are able to build between different kinds of players who are working on the aspects of agri-food systems, we can accelerate the usage and uptake of digital technologies among the smallholder farmers, and thus will be able to facilitate and accelerate their climate adaptation. The 𝗘𝗀𝗿 platform comprises a cross-cutting research, evaluation, and learning function, which is focusing on integration and coordination along value chains between the agtechs and fintechs and other players in the ecosystem. We are also looking at diffusion of innovation that is happening across different markets, across different thematic areas. And finally, we are looking at aspects of bringing together financial and non-financial services that could help in climate mitigation, resilience, and adaptation. So today's topic that we are going to cover is on community-based adaptation. We are organizing discussions on several different topics, bringing experts from the field. The next meeting that is going to happen in 2 months' time would focus on the policy and regulatory aspects around climate resilient agriculture. And that would be followed with another meeting, another discussion in July, which will be focusing on the role of financial instruments and the private sector players for climate resilient agriculture. I would urge you to join our LinkedIn page, which is Climate Resilient Agriculture Virtual Club, and also support us in amplifying our post on Twitter. The Twitter post feeds are hashtag with 𝗘𝗀𝗿 Climate Resilient Agriculture Virtual Club. Moving on, I thought I'll quickly do an introduction to this topic. So climate-based adaptation is a decentralized and participatory approach which involves the local stakeholders and communities in addressing the impact of climate change, and also focuses on enhancing smallholder farmers' adaptive capacity. Integrating the agriculture technologies and agtech firms can further empower these communities to build resilience and ensure food security. But to be able to focus on this, several lessons have emerged from the use of community-based adaptation approaches. The first lesson that has emerged is around local knowledge and participation, which essentially means that there has to be an engagement of local community and incorporating their knowledge in the decision making. That way, the solutions that are built are culturally appropriate, context specific, and are accepted by the community. The second aspect is on capacity building, where providing training and capacity building opportunities for the farmers on using agtechs is essential. This includes the aspects of technical training, aspects of access to information, and improving the understanding in general for the smallholder farmers on climate change impacts on agriculture. The third aspect that we have learned from our work in this area is on scalability, flexibility, and replicability. AgTech solutions need to become scalable and adaptable to the different contexts and environments. Flexibility in design essentially focuses on customization to ensure that these emerging technologies can meet the varying needs of smallholder farmers. Second last topic and point is on collaboration and partnership. We have seen that successful community-based adaptation approaches involve collaboration among various stakeholders, including the farmers, non-government organizations, government agencies, and the private sector. These kind of partnerships then are able to take care of some of the challenges that exist. The challenges around securing funding for climate-based, for the community-based adaptation, providing the technical expertise that is required, and also promoting knowledge sharing so that we are learning from each other's successes and failures. Thereafter, the last aspect is on addressing the social and gender inequalities. The interventions around this need to be designed to be inclusive and addressing the existing social and gender inequalities. This involves actively engaging the marginalized group in the decision-making process, as well as ensuring the equitable access to resources and benefits. So this is the insights that have emerged from the work that we have been doing around this area. But we have two panelists who are extremely experienced on the call today. Maybe we can move to the next slide, please. Introducing the panelists. So our first panelist, we have Madam 𝗘𝗀𝗿𝗿. 𝗘𝗀𝗿𝗿 is the head of gender and inclusiveness at AGRA. She is a senior agriculture strategist, programs director, and global team leader. And she has a demonstrated track record working with inclusive and sustainable agriculture, market-based solutions, value chains, women economic empowerment, youth employment, and agri-entrepreneurship, and SME development. She wears several hats and brings over 20 years of experience in global agriculture sector, spanning multiple geographies in Africa, Asia, and Europe. Welcome, Madam 𝗘𝗀𝗿𝗿, to our session.
Thank you.
Then we have 𝗘𝘀𝘁 𝗔𝗵𝗽𝗍. 𝗘𝘀 is an agribusiness and climate change consultant. He's an action-oriented management professional with over 10 years of experience in field operations and working with multinational non-governmental organizations. He possesses exceptional capacity building skills in project management, sustainable agriculture, environmental conservation, organization development, and community resource mobilization. 𝗘𝘀, welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Ylif and the team.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to now talk about the two topics that we are discussing. Maybe next slide, please. So the first topic that we have put together for our extremely experienced panelists is what are the opportunities and challenges of using community-based adaptation approaches in East Africa to build the adaptive capacity of smallholders. As you are speaking, you may also bring nuances from other African markets or Asian markets where you have great experience of working in. Maybe we can start with you, Madam 𝗘𝗀𝗿𝗿. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Anup and the MicroSave team. Again, I would like to commend you for this excellent initiative around climate resilient agriculture, and particularly the adaptation and mitigation knowledge that you are advancing across the continent, and particularly East Africa. And I'm very, very happy and privileged to join your virtual club for East Africa to share knowledge, but also to advance this particular agenda. Thank you so much. So we are looking at the opportunities of community-based adaptations. And first of all, let me really step back and recognize the challenges that climate change is posing for smallholder farmers across the continent. And this is something that we as an organization have recognized and have adopted within our programming and within our intervention pathways and within our results and within our partnerships. Maybe I just say that I work for AGRA, and Anup has already made that introduction. I work for AGRA as a head of gender and inclusiveness in agriculture. Coming back to the opportunities around community-based adaptations, adaptation approaches in East Africa. I think, first of all, I recognize that the approach itself is really unique in the sense that it brings together the expertise that we will have garnered through science, through practices, through approaches, through development practices that we within the development sector will have developed, and bringing it into the context of local communities who have their own knowledge. And a number of times we don't recognize this, the fact that the communities have over time and having been exposed to the climate change for quite some time now, they have adopted, they have developed knowledge, experiences, and coping mechanism, which is critical to recognize. So one of the opportunities that we have is actually harnessing this knowledge, the experience, and the coping mechanisms that local communities have, and try to bring this to scale. So as development organizations, and certainly in our own context, we are trying a number of initiatives that are tried in a context, and community-based adaptation approaches actually are very context specific, trying them in a context. And once we see, together with communities, of course, once we see that there is relevance, that there is a model that is emerging, this is then scaled across the country, of course, in areas where there is relevance, and across the continent or the cluster of the countries. You, in your opening remark, Anup, you did mention the funding opportunities being limited. Indeed, they are limited, but right now there is a mushrooming of opportunities around the climate change agenda. And I think what I feel is missing is actually the models to invest in, and that is where maybe as development organizations we need to channel our support to really come up with climate resilient products, and that climate resilient product or processes, community adaptation processes that of course fit the bill of the time, and that can be invested in by donors and funding mechanisms that are out there, so that we can bring these things to scale. The other opportunity of community-based adaptation approaches, of course, is the fact that through the engagement with the local communities, but also through the engagements with the governments, that there is the potential to unlock public investment in this particular area, of course, driven by the national priorities that the governments, the countries will have come up with. And in our case, in the case of AGRA, we work a lot with countries to really adopt in their national priorities and investment plans, the climate resilience agenda, and really bring this into the investment mechanism so that decisions are taken on resourcing that is then going to address these gaps at the local level. The knowledge exchanges, and again, you did make reference to the AgTech, the capacity for the digital technology, for example, to relay this information and to share this information widely. We have the opportunity today to connect these pockets of successes around climate resilient agriculture and connect it across the country, across the region, across the continent. So, I mean, in our case, we are based, of course, in East Africa. We're based in Nairobi. We work across 11 countries. The technology, the digital technology allows us to bring this to scale across all these regions, and this brings efficiency, this brings effectiveness, and of course we have to really look at the inclusion issue, which is something that you made reference to. Very, very critical. Again, not everybody has access to this technology. Not everybody has the hardware that is needed to receive this information. Not everybody, of course, is literate enough to understand this information in the way that it should, but indeed it gives us the mechanism for wider dissemination of these successes, these pockets of successes that we are observing at the moment. So maybe I stop there for now.
Thank you so much. You have given so much of in terms of setting up the context, and there would be some follow-on questions. I'm sure I'll also encourage the participants to put their questions in the chat box. Timothy, your take on this?
Thank you very much, Anup and team, for this invitation, and also Sabdio for that insightful introduction. I will look at the opportunities basically when you're talking about. Sorry, let me just put on my video. Thank you very much. What kind of opportunities are we looking at as we are tackling these community-based approaches to climate change and approaches to agriculture? One of the greatest things is maintaining the sustainable development goals that we have set up by the United Nations and of course other international bodies. And the SDGs, one of them I quoted is the issue of hunger alleviation. Once community-based approaches are there, we find that people are able to take in new knowledge, which will be able to alleviate hunger. Even though we are facing that great challenge, but on the other side, other communities that are adapting these approaches of togetherness, of doing things together in mitigation of climate change challenges, now are realizing that we have enough production of good food for people on the table. Then the gender inclusivity, which Sabdio again has talked about, and she's heading. I'm very glad. Gender roles are now well defined, and everybody seems to enjoy being in the same area when you have these community-based approaches. The youth, together with the women, will be involved equally, like men will be involved. So you find that everybody is running up and down, and then we are actually meeting our sustainable development agenda. I'm looking at sustainable development goal number 15. Life on land has been made easy. Life on land is being made easy because people are realizing now that unless we tackle together these issues of climate change through agriculture, our life will not be easy. So we find that communities together make our life easy. And maybe the last thing on sustainable development goals is the climate change action, which now when you look at all organizations, they have to include that in their plan. Beginning with AGRA, you go to ICRAF, ICRISAT, and all these other big organizations, UNEP, and the other organizations, you find that climate action now being one of the sustainable development goals, that is number 13, climate action. You find that people now are into it, that how can we enjoy working together through these community-based approaches. But other opportunities that I greatly see, even though I'm seeing more challenges compared to maybe opportunities, is access to services. You find that we have so many stakeholders on the ground, which might be business related or even development partners who are on the ground, who are helping people now access these services. Right now, I'm seated in a small dispensary in a village in Busia County, and you find that services now are able to reach people through other development partners who are there. And when they come there, they're talking about eating healthy food. And that one is done by the village-based advisors. Those are local communities trained just to talk about good health, good climate action, and so forth. And then there's this dissemination of knowledge, that is capacity development of the local communities. You find that local communities are well trained in terms of understanding what they are supposed to do and how they are going to approach different issues on climate action when they're in group, rather than taking one of them and training them in a big seminar, staying in Nairobi or even abroad, and the same person cannot disseminate the information. Now the information has come down to the village, and as a community, they are able to approach that together. And then when you began, you talked, Anup, you talked about having development partners and who include financial institutions. And even for me to join this forum, I think it's through a financial institution that I was able to be here. So you find that now financial access services now are able to reach people because without finances, no action of whatever nature easily kicks in the down in the villages. So financial access is now being made easy. When you look at a little example of the Equity Group Foundation, apart from just talking about the foundation and the philanthropy side, find that they go ahead to train farmers on climate change action, financial inclusion, gender inclusion, and also environmental maintenance. So we find that it's becoming now easy for people even to access finance, and they tag a financial approach even though they're in groups. So what will bring them together is the finances, and then from there they can even do other activities. And one last thing is business advisory is localized. In terms of business, agribusiness, working in the field of this experience, we have these development partners. Just to mention the CGA, they are now tackling the issue of climate change, but we have some program they call Farm to Market Alliance. This Farm to Market Alliance will address the issues of climate change through the communities, will address issues of adapting new agriculture technologies, but at the end of the day, they have the ready market for the community. They link the communities to market through collective aggregation of their goods. So we find that in everything we are doing, we look at climate change, but there's a tag on it, which is making great opportunities come to our people. I think that is what I'll share up to there. Back to you, Anup. I think I'll have more insights as we go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Timon, for making very insightful pointers over here. Maybe I'll go back to Sabdio and talk about specific points, and then I come back to you on some of the specific follow-on questions. Sabdio, if we look at the particular aspect of harnessing the local knowledge, I do understand that, I mean, about 20, 30 years ago, or even before that, there would be farmers would have that tacit traditional knowledge with which they would be able to predict what the behavior going to be, and how of the looking at the wind and climate and the weather situation, and would be able to plan aspects. But what we have seen is that in the last couple of decades, the transformation has been pretty rapid. The weather and climate transformation has been pretty rapid. So how do you think about, bringing together the local knowledge? You talked about harnessing the local traditional knowledge and putting together with the digital awareness that we are able to do, the prediction that we're able to do, looking at the satellite and weather data, and create something which can be communicated and disseminated quickly so that the adaptation process could become even more efficient. Your thoughts on that, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anup. And again, you're absolutely right. Over time, local knowledge, because of our own inability to harness and to document and to even build, this has waned over time. This has waned over time. And when it comes to climate change adaptation, the best people to actually come up with coping mechanisms are the local communities, because climate change is not something that just happens overnight. It's a slow onset. And we can see, for example, for us in the ag sector, it's very clear that yields have been declining over time. These farmers can tell you, they can tell you that, for example, the yields for cereal have been reducing, and I have actually stagnated at 25% of the potentially attainable yield. This they can see this happening. They can see the rains becoming less and less. They can see the rains becoming less predictable. They can see the dry spells increasing. But what they are not able to connect, of course, is this knowledge that they have gathered over time in a context of the broader emerging insights across the continent, or across the globe even, because most of the local people are within rural areas. Access to information is limited. Access to information that is outside their immediate environment is limited. So they cannot connect what's happening within their local communities with what's happening everywhere else. I think in terms of improving this and filling in this gap, one is, first of all, we have to, and maybe just to bring in another context here. The engagements that we have around climate change so far, the way local communities experience this is in form of trials and studies. You know, people come, try to project, for example, when it comes to yield, or they come to project in terms of how temperatures are changing, how soil fertility is changing, how water availability within the soil nutrient, everything, how these things are changing. We development organizations or even scientists coming into it from a research perspective to draw knowledge, but not really to build on their knowledge. So I think what is critical is, and taking, for example, a country like Kenya that is now fully decentralized with the local governments at the level of communities. Those local governments need to be empowered so that they become the first point where local knowledge is harnessed, is documented, so that we do not lose it. As generations change, this local knowledge will disappear. So this is the first thing that is so critical. Build the capacity of local governments so that they harness and they document those copy mechanisms, the experiences, the knowledge of these people, and how they have dealt, local people, and how they have dealt with climate change and the uncertainty that poses. And then the second thing that really needs to be done is then, once this knowledge is documented, is captured, it needs to be shared. It needs to be shared. It needs to be built back, for example, into the curriculums for school, so that young people, children, they come through this system, so that the whole system sort of mainstreams the whole resilience agenda.
So Tim, quickly, so you talked a lot about the localization, customization, the aspect of financial access, and so on. One question that I had as you were speaking about the aspect or the impact of financial access, do you think that the tech-enabled solutions that should be incorporated, that should be deployed and implemented in the local communities, should be privately funded, or should there be philanthropic funding that should go beyond? Because does it make enough business case for tech-enabled solutions to be broad-basing, scaling up in the local communities?
Thank you very much. Maybe before I just answer you, Sabdio was saying something very important on. I hope I'm clear. Something on the climate change agenda being West-driven, which is very true, and that is the issue that we are currently having. So I'll weigh in a little bit on that. Is that we need to make our communities adapt the knowledge that they used to have, the knowledge that we inherited from our great-grandfathers, because they used to have great land. We used to have very well elaborated seasons, and people used to plant at the right time, and the issue of food scarcity was something unheard of. But currently we are facing that big issue of food scarcity each and every time. Even though the population has grown, but we need to adapt with this population growth in terms of adapting our local knowledge, so that we continue enhancing our local genetics in terms of the seed that we have in the field, and also approach to soil fertility and water usage. Just to drive back to your point, what you've asked me on financing, the community-based approaches and the climate approaches, should it be private or public? If I got you right in a nutshell, Anut.
Yeah, that is right.
Yeah. So for me, I'll say it can be both private and public, but I will go the private way personally, if you ask me, because the donor funding, for example, has made us slaves. I've made these community slaves. When they see somebody coming up with a project that will help them, they only see that. How much are we going to get that? What is it in for me? What am I going to gain? Having worked for different organizations, we had a problem sometimes. As I used to work in my earlier years, we had this carbon project, and the carbon project basically is to ensuring that carbon sinks are well elaborated and farmers are being paid carbon credits funded from the West. So all the time, the community used to think there's a lot of money in the project. We are going to sell air, we are going to sell carbon, and we are planting trees. Everybody is celebrating. Yes, we will see the trees coming, the villages turning green. We'll see soil fertility improvement, and people going. We have entrepreneurs. But at the end of the day, when it came to the real payment, people were getting very low payment in terms of carbon credit. And therefore it became chaotic because people were expecting a lot of money and we had to be turned away from that community. We don't want your projects. But at the end of the day, we told people, see what we've done. We've enabled you now, you have good soil fertility. We've linked you to markets. We've not been here to sell carbon because even we don't understand the carbon itself. Can you touch it? Can you feel it? Yes, we've participated in changing the climate, but at the end of the day, we are harvesting little. Can we look on the other side that we've been able to bring back our environment to safety and you're able to farm? So, and that was because there was some donor funding involved in it. Donor had taken money, is now sponsoring a project so that we are able to sell carbon. And you see that approach becomes hard. But when I look at the private sector, for example, we have one common one called the agribees. I don't know who funds the agribees. Maybe if somebody is there will tell me. But the agribees approach, for example, I'm with them and on the ground, I normally see them. What they do, they'll give you a seed funding. The seed funding is to enable you begin a project. It can be almost like donor funding. But next time when they are giving you, they'll give you a matching fund to what you have. You have 1 million, they add you another 1 million for that. So it's a matching fund. But next time as you grow, they now give you a debt. So you are liable to pay. And that encourages the community to work towards something because now this is private money, this is the private sector. I've been with the Equity Group Foundation and they've been doing the same. We receive funds from donors and they inject into community projects, and the communities now have to work and repay at with a small stipend because now this is private money from a private entity. This is not free donor money, but it's coming in to help you grow and achieve. But without a tag on it that you're going to pay this form of soft loan, the community will think this is money for spending, and they'll be waiting for that money, and they'll be enslaved into that money, and we shall still continue depending on the West. So far, so good. I think that is what I can chip in a note for and the team. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see Sabdio is back, so I would like to bring her into the very interesting point that you are making, Sabdio, just before we had that momentary disconnect. So, Sabdio, you were talking about the climate change discourse is driven from the West and how the localization point is important. And then I'll also like to have your feedback on the point that Timothy has just raised around the tangibilization of incentives. Especially to the communities. How can we make incentives more tangible? There's a question from one of our participants as well on this particular topic, and there are 2 questions in total. So I'll take up that, but let's first have you complete your thought around the discourse, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So and apologies for the interruption. Yeah, so I was just, of course, talking about how critical it is to harness local knowledge, but how difficult that also becomes when the agenda is very much driven from an external view, an external perspective. And in that context, I was making reference to how the climate change agenda is being driven largely by the West, and Africa needs, and Africa generally, but many of our countries need to do quite a bit in terms of catching up. And what that does is that, you know, it takes the power away from where these actions happen, and you become passive participant. And Africa has become a passive participant. I mean, one of the things that we are trying to do as an organization is really to bolster the position of Africa within the climate change discourse or the climate change adaptation discourse in the context of agriculture, and to see how the continent can develop a common position. We can advance a common position. We can claim for our space within the whole risk mitigation measures and the whole recovery agenda that is now being discussed in the context of this fund, and so on and so forth. So it's yeah, I mean, I just wanted to show how the fact that the agenda is driven externally is far removed from where the local action is needed, which is really at the level of communities. Now, coming back to the point that Timothy made, and to your question around what are the incentives? This is a tricky one in the sense that, of course, we're looking at the immediate incentives to change behavior of local communities and farmers. So the kind of incentives that we are discussing in the context, for example, smallholder farming, is how do we get farmers, smallholder farmers, to adopt climate adaptation measures or climate resilient agriculture. And here the incentives would certainly be coming from the side of the market. Like, how do you pay a premium, for example, for a produce that is produced through certain climate resilient protocols? Yeah, how the products are recognized within the market. What is the margin that is put on a farmer that adopts adaptation measures, right? How do you reward a farmer who uses climate resilient seed? Of course, some of the rewards are already inherent within that system, right? Your crop is not going to fail. Yeah, but if it doesn't fail and you get it, and the other farmer also, because climate rainfall patterns are very unpredictable, the farmer who plants climate resilient seed and the one who doesn't use climate resilient seed, in a good weather, maybe the other one actually gets even a bit more. So how do you reward for this kind of differential results, even when you want to pursue a certain practice, even when you want to push on a change agenda that is leaning on climatic resilience? So these are all the issues. I mean, we're looking at the issues around soil health. Yeah, the use of fertilizer, organic fertilizer, inorganic fertilizer, for example. There are quick wins in using organic fertilizer, right? We know that, but for the purposes of soil health, we want to promote farmers to also possibly increasingly adopt inorganic fertilizer, but then it doesn't pay as much, it doesn't yield as much. So what are the trade-offs here? So these are the quagmire that most smallholder farmers face, and this is all happening in the context of declining labor productivity, rural-urban migration. The rural economy isn't performing that well already, so there isn't as much that is coming back to the farmer. So how do you incentivize a smallholder farmer to adopt climate resilient agriculture? So as I said, I think the incentives need to come from the market side, but also the incentive needs to come from the public sector side. And this is where I pick on the point that Timothy was making. And Timothy was saying, yeah, we need to go on the private side. We need to unlock private investment. Yes, we need to unlock private investment. I fully agree with that, that in the end, it is the private sector solutions that are going to yield the kind of results that we are looking for. But the public sector has a huge role to play in terms of demonstrating those models and using the example that Timothy was using, for example, the agribusiness example. If a donor was not putting money into giving these young people a chance, they will not have had an opportunity to prove that they are worthy of investment. So that is the place where public money can play. Donor money is public money, unless, of course, it comes from private investment. Even when it comes from private foundations, it still serves the public mandate. So it's still considered public money. That is where public money could play to help demonstrate those models, which can then be scaled by the private sector. So that would be my take on that particular aspect. Thanks, and over to you, Anup.
Thank you so much. Very insightful. I'll take the 3 questions that have emerged from the participants just one by one. So if I start first one, Sabdir, this one is for you. Arjun writes that one of the critical elements of advancing community-based adaptation is a focus on learning and flexibility in how programming takes place at the local levels. Have you seen instances among funders who are more willing to accept this need for flexibility and learning as critical elements of adaptation programming? And related to that, there's a question also from Graham, who talks about localization. He says that localization is so important that imposing solution from the West is, of course, completely counterproductive. But we know that climate impacts can be very variable and localized even within countries and indeed districts. So how can we realistically generalize and replicate solutions even if they are developed within Africa?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the 2 questions. Yes, yes, indeed, the learning and flexibility in program design. I mean, I have been in the development sector now for quite some time, and one of the key principles that runs through every program design is that the group, the beneficiary group, the so-called beneficiary group, must participate in the design of that program. So this is a critical element, I think, that is that needs to be reinforced, especially for climate adaptation measures, because this revolves around people's local knowledge, people's experience. It's an experience that you have lived over life. You see these changes in your local community. You see your planting season being pushed, you know, by a week, or by days, because the rain doesn't come at the normal time, that when it comes a bit more torrential at once, and then it ends quickly. These are things that people experience every day. So unless these programs are located within the understanding and the local context, they do not speak to the needs of those people. So it's very critical. And I see that many donors are speaking to this need. Right now, we are working with a donor who has an interest to work with young people in the context of climate resilient agriculture. And the voices of those young people is integral to that program design, and it's a critical condition for the organization to access that resource. So I think this is the way that it can become institutionalized, so that the voices of the local community becomes key in the design of programs. The localization agenda, absolutely, I agree with you. And this is really the challenge with climate adaptation measures, is that because every ecosystem is different, every place is different, it's hard to replicate a model from one place to another and to another. But there's certain key principles that are useful in terms of scaling, right? And we are just speaking to them right now. The first one is the principle around ensuring that the local knowledge of the local communities inform the design. This is a broad principle. Whether you're doing it in East Africa or the Horn of Africa, which is really very prone to drought and disasters, whether you're doing it in the Sahel, where you're doing it in Southern Africa, you know, the Kalahari, this principle applies across the board. So this one is the fact that there is need to amplify what works, successes, the successes that come through. And these successes, there's some salient messages that are critical. Like, for example, when you use the use of, and I refer to the use of drought-tolerant seeds because it's one of the things that we do, right? When a seed variety that is more adaptable to climate change, for example, that more adaptable to the warmth that is happening across most of the farmland, that is more adaptable to less moisture, that is more adaptable to soil that is deficient in certain. When something like this comes up, this needs to be amplified so that areas that can absorb this particular seed can take it up. So there are salient things, even when we know the practice becomes localized, there are salient things that could be taken across from one area to the other. And those are the things, in my view, that needs to be sifted through and scaled. Yeah, so maybe I stop there, Anup.
Thank you so much. I'd like to bring Tim for the next question. Tim, this question is on the aspect of equitable distribution. So this is where just of CBA is inequitable distribution of benefits. Community-based adaptation approaches may not benefit all members of the community equally and may exacerbate existing social, economic, and gender inequalities. So how can we ensure that the benefits of CBA interventions are distributed equitably and that marginalized groups are not left behind? Timoth, may I request you to start your video?
Thank you. I was unmuting. Thank you very much on the issue of that is inclusivity. I think it has been a great challenge to all of us, and that's why many organizations have even that department. Apart from the human resource department, they have that gender role defined, gender inclusion role defined, maybe as one of the employees or somebody who drives the agenda. And having worked through these many communities, through the self-help groups, the local group, the CBOs involved, and sometimes even at the federation, that thing has been there. You find in that it's very patriarchal. Men will take even the front role in terms of sharing these resources, and becomes hard. Even if a woman is participating in the group or a wife is participating in the group, you find that in our local communities, in Africa, of course, the African context, you find that the men take the center role in terms of distribution and sharing out. As they do so, you rightly put it, is that the marginalized community, the marginalized people, the disabled are also not given an opportunity. And how my approach to this, or my take to this, is that first of all, I've seen it happen in Uganda. When you go to Mbale, we have the Mbale Bananas Farmers Cooperative. It began with the leadership in the group, because these complaints were there. So what do? For every position that is there, an assistant must be of the opposite gender. This already ensures that right from the top of leadership, you find that there's that sharing.
Sabdio, if I may invite you for your concluding remarks in a Twitter character limit, not the 4,000 characters in US, but 280 characters in Africa. Thank you. Sorry, you are muted.
Again, I just, first of all, and maybe this will certainly exceed the Twitter characters, but I really want to appreciate this opportunity for us to share ideas on climate adaptation measures, and of course the central role that communities play, and the knowledge of communities, and of course playing this in the context of the wider discourse that is happening on climate change. I think it's very, very important, first of all, for us here on the continent to define our own climate adaptation agenda and to drive it actively as a continent, as a region, as a country. because as we said, again, this is a very context-specific agenda. It's critical for us to come up with context-specific solutions with a wider, with some strands or some knowledge of this becoming widely replicable. This is my first takeaway from this discussion. The second one is, of course, that it's very critical for us to ensure that even when we are responding, even when we are responding beyond the design, even when we are responding, that this response takes on board the knowledge that the local communities have, and not as passive participants, not as people that are there to be studied or for them, you know, but as active participants who bring in value and who, given the right incentives, can actually affect the kind of change that we are looking for. And the third one I would like to say, in just as the takeaway is of course the fact that right now we have mechanisms to widely share these pockets of success that are coming out. Yes, indeed, adaptation measures are context specific, but there are successes that are universal, and this could be shared through technology. I think we've talked about digital tech is so critical, and so it's important for us to use technology to disseminate some of these positive triggers that are coming through these adaptation measures. And finally, I think it's so critical for our governments to take ownership of this agenda and to drive it and to harness the knowledge that our local people have, so that this can be preserved and can also be brought into the curriculum of schools and curriculum of colleges, so that young generation are able to pick this and push this forward. So those are my 4 takeaways from this conversation. Thank you, Anup. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Really, I think you made my job very easy by summarizing the conversation. Tim, I hope you are back. If you're back, would you like to take this up, conclude your last point that you were mentioning, and put forward a concluding remark?
Thank you very much. Sorry for that mishap. I was talking on the inclusivity, that is best gender inclusivity, and also the marginalized, the handicapped people. And I was saying that if you go to Uganda, I've been to Mbale Bananas Cooperative, they share the roles right from the leadership. So the issue of gender biasness is quickly eliminated right from the top. You find that women will fight for their space, men will fight in their space, and then it becomes a community approach. It no longer becomes, it is a gender issue. You'll never find those issues in the group. When it comes to time for sending people for meetings, go and somewhere and learn. We have a big seminar. You find they go in equal numbers. And you know that builds the community, and everybody's participation is brought to par. So my approach is that if many of our groups who want to do these community-based approaches will adopt that thing of organization development, where roles are already distributed right from leadership, it becomes easy. But we have these specific groups, we call them chamas in our area. Basically, you'll find them, they comprise only of women, or they'll comprise of the youth, or even men. It's up to us, the players in the field. We have AGRA being one of it. We have other development partners to see if we can specifically bring these women on board, men on board, like those groups, we bring them specifically with specific roles. I'm talking about the marginalized and the disabled people. They may not be having the same energy like the other people have, but what do we do to them? I've been to an expo in Nairobi, and we have this group from Nyeri of the physically handicapped. They came in with their mats woven from banana fibers, I think, and I can tell you those people were selling a lot more than the other people. So you see, once they are also involved in such seminars and such expos, you find that it gets the confidence of people, and everybody becomes like, we don't have the disparity in terms of gender, in terms of being physically disabled. Everybody is there. But it is also a public approach that the government has put in place. We know we have in Kenya we have the constitution which talks about 30% gender balance in everything, and also inclusion of the physically handicapped. I think we really do not follow it to the latter. We can still make it a local thing, because when you go back to the community, the people who suffer the most will be the youth, followed by the women, of course. And I'll say it will be hard for you, even if you are physically handicapped. You will perish like that, struggling. So these are the people we need to bring them in group, ensure they also have the local knowledge, and also they go to school. And then our approach becomes easy, and inclusion in terms of everything we do becomes easy. I think that will be my take, Anut, for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I see now we have 3 more minutes. Apologies, we couldn't take up all the questions, but very interesting questions emerged as we were having this conversation. Thank you so much, Sabdio and Timot, for so insightful discussion around the specific aspects of climate-based adaptation. I'm taking home quite a lot of things, including the aspect of how do we document and share the coping mechanism that has been built over a period of time, the local tacit awareness understanding that is there, the aspect around funding opportunities, how could it be leveraged. One point which really emerged was that the public and private funding has to be balanced in the way that the sequencing should be where the demonstration effect is shown from the public funding and the private sector follows in when there is a business case. I also like the aspect around moving beyond trials and studies and moving to the action part, the localization, the aspect of localization, designing for the user, for the context and the key principles for scaling up, even though when the context is not exactly the same. Thank you so much for your time, participants, and asking great questions. There are some questions which have not been answered. We'll work on them and get back to you. The next session that we would have would be on the aspects of policy and regulations, and we are going to hold it in May, 2 months from now. We are organizing another stellar lineup of panelists who can decode the issues around policies and regulations. We'll welcome you for that. Please do follow our Twitter handle and then also the hashtag #CrackVC, and please join us on Climate Resilient Agriculture Virtual Club. We'll also benefit from the aspects of what is happening on the climate adaptation side from the Asian side as well as from Africa. Again, thank you so much. Closing this on time. Thanks, Abdio. Thanks, Timot. Thank you, everyone, for joining in.